Okay, let's go ahead and get this workshop started, shall we? So once again, welcome to the Raw Feeding 101 workshop, a live walkthrough of the raw feeding transition, okay? And in this video, again, we are going to be covering everything that it is that you need to know to get yourself started, switching from the current food that you're feeding right now. Maybe you're even feeding some fresh foods, but you want to completely transition all the way to being 4 weeks in and knowing what you need to add to the diet after the initial transition and what you need to do after the initial transition is over, what you have to do, okay? So don't skip out early because there's a lot of important stuff here. All right, so part one, getting over nervousness, okay? Being nervous is completely normal. It happens to everybody. I have not met a single person that had the transition in mind that wanted to get started with raw feeding that wasn't nervous. So don't feel bad if you feel nervous. It happens to literally everyone, and you can get past it. You just have to get your education, do what we're doing here today, going through the workshop, getting other education, and making sure that you get comfortable with your knowledge, with yourself, and it'll start to feel normal. Now, finding comfort, okay? Finding comfort in the fact that literally, this is not an exaggeration. So when I say literally, it's literal. Literally tens of thousands of other pet parents, just average pet parents like me, like you, that wanted to start feeding their dogs a better diet have done this. They've gone out, they've done the research, they've gone through the uncomfortable periods of being nervous, the uncomfortable periods of feeling like a new learner and being confused possibly by some of the information that's out there, but they successfully did it. Tens of thousands of other people are out there doing this and feeding hundreds of thousands, if not more, hundreds of thousands of dogs on this diet. So find comfort in that. Trust yourself in your research. You're here during a 2-hour workshop learning about this, making sure that you're getting yourself the right education, because that's the number one thing to getting over nervousness, to getting a safe transition done, to having a healthy dog. Education is the bedrock for all of that. So trust yourself and your research as you're going through, as you're doing this workshop, as you're getting other forms of education, reading books, all these different things. Trust yourself in the research that you're doing, okay? Now, the nervousness is here to stay until you actually get started. Let's say that you do everything, right? Let's say that you go through this workshop. Let's say that you go through my Raw Feeding 101 course. Let's say that you find a local mentor in the raw feeding community. Whatever it happens to be, you get your bedrock education set in, and it's awesome, right? You've done your education, you are good to go. You are going to be nervous until you feed your first meal, which is what we're all about here today, is getting you started on that journey. So the nervousness of feeding raw foods is not going to leave you until you feed your dog raw foods. But again, that's completely normal, and you just need to push past it and feed that first meal, okay? Now, I know this is a little bit of it looks like it's a rude statement here. You are the biggest problem, okay? And what I mean by that, calm down. What I mean by that is that as far as the transition goes, you are the biggest problem as far as things to overcome goes, okay? Your dog was built for this diet. This is what they are supposed to be consuming, right? So that's not a problem. The education portion you're taking care of right now, and you're going to do more so in the future, right? You're getting your bedrock education in place to make sure that you're doing it responsibly, safely, and everything else. But you are the biggest problem. All the mental stuff going on inside of your head, as far as, being nervous and, being victim to the very well-funded and successful marketing campaigns from large pet food companies telling you that raw food is dangerous, right? This is what has been happening to all of us for decades, right? And now the FDA and others are getting involved in that. But you have been set up to be afraid of this. You've been set up to be nervous of this, hearing your whole life that chicken bones are bad and so on, right? If we can get you past this stuff, if we can get you comfortable, if we can get your bedrock education in place, then we can do the rest of it, right? We just have to get past your nervousness and get past you, and then let the dog and the diet that they were supposed to have do the rest for us, okay? So let's move on here to part 2. Friends, family, and veterinarians, okay? And first of all, you are a crazy person. Yes, I said it. Now, again, I'm not trying to be mean here, but from the perspective of the rest of the planet, the rest of the world, the other, 95, 96% of the dog owner population that's not feeding this way or not wanting to feed this way, you look like a crazy person. You are wanting to feed your dogs raw food, raw bones. You want to feed your dogs organs and feathers and all these different things eventually. And it looks crazy to people from the outside in. And it's completely normal to feel that way when you start telling friends and family about, hey, I'm switching to this new raw diet. It messes with people's heads. I have cousins who are very much 110% in support of what I'm doing as far as, making a life out of teaching people how to feed their dogs raw foods. They're 100% behind it, but they would never do it themselves because it just plain grosses them out. Okay. So there's just going to be some people out there that no matter what is going on, they're just not going to be cool with it. Okay. And that kind of leads us into our second thing, which is education versus toxic conversations. Now, what I have with my cousins, for example, is they're educational or they are pleasant conversations or they just end, right? If you have somebody that is asking you about your dog's diet that you are or are wanting to do, then you can either do one of two things. You can have a pleasant, potentially educational conversation and give them a little bit more info about it. Maybe they switch their dogs over. Or it's a toxic conversation where you're just being told you're a crazy person, you're being told that you're dangerous, you're being told that you're going to get your family, yourself, your dogs, your baby, your grandma, everybody sick from salmonella and E. coli, and you're just a bad person for doing it, right? That's a toxic conversation. And there's no reason to stay in that toxic conversation. If you want to take on the responsibility of teaching your friends, teaching your family, giving them some education about what it is that you're doing with the raw food diet for your dogs, no matter what form it takes, that's a good thing, and I applaud you for it. But if that conversation starts to turn toxic, you need to end it. You just need to be done with that conversation, because when you're dealing with a person like that, no amount of proof, no amount of education, pleasant conversation, science, whatever is going to convince that person. So it's just time to leave. Okay. Maybe it's literally leave or just end the conversation if it's online in a Facebook group or whatever it happens to be, right? End the conversation. Now, your go-to statement. Your go-to statement is huge. Your go-to statement is something that is pre-prepared that you say every single time that somebody asks you about what it is that you're doing and they may be giving you a hard time about it. For example, let's say that you go to your veterinarian, right? And you say that they ask you the question that pretty much all of them do. So what are you feeding your dog? And you say raw foods, okay? More often than not, you're going to get some pushback on that. It might be more aggressive than other times, which we don't have time to go into in this particular workshop, the different types of veterinarians and how to deal with them. I've got a little bit more on that later at the end of the video. But some of them are more aggressive than others about you not feeding raw foods, right? And all that you can do really, other than having one of those education conversations, is giving your go-to statement. A go-to statement is something like, I appreciate what you're doing. I know that it's just out of concern, but I've done the research, I've educated myself, and this is what I've decided is best for my dogs. Really short, really simple. It sounds like you know what you're talking about because you've rehearsed it beforehand. You're not stumbling all over your words. And at that point, it's kind of a precursor of, is this conversation going to be a pleasant educational one, or is it going to be a toxic one? And then you get to choose which one it is and act accordingly, right? And speaking of veterinarians should be your partner. They should not be your enemy, okay? I know that there's a lot, especially if you've been spending some time in raw feeding Facebook groups, whether it's my group, whether it's raw feeding 101, whether it's raw feeding university, whatever it happens to be. If you're spending some time in those groups, I'm sure you're seeing somebody say something bad about veterinarians and how they're all anti-raw, which isn't correct, okay? But no matter what, at the end of the day, your vet should be your partner, not your enemy. They should be, you guys have the same goals. You want to keep your dogs as happy and as healthy for as long as possible, okay? So don't hide the fact that you feed raw foods to your veterinarian. If you have a veterinarian, and again, I can't get into the different types because it'd just take too long. Excuse me. It'd just take too long to go into all the different types of veterinarians and how to deal with them. But if you have a veterinarian that is just a problem and they make you feel bad, or they blame every single problem that your dog has on raw food, like your dog turns a corner and they break, like a toenail off or something like that, and the vet blames it on raw feeding, like, it's time to fire your vet and find a new vet that can be your partner in your dog's health, because that's what they are, or at least that's what they should be. Okay. Now, spouses and significant others. This is a big one because your spouse and or your significant other is a major part of your life. They are involved in pretty much everything that you do, your finances in the home, where you live, everything, right? So if they have problems with the fact that you want to feed your dog raw foods, that's a major problem. And again, I have some additional information and something later on that goes into details of how to work with your spouse or significant other in trying to show them your side of the story. But when it comes to your spouse and significant other, the best thing that you can do is give them your take. Tell them why it is that you want to switch to raw foods, why it is that you want to get off of kibble and other traditionally available commercial pet foods, and really just educate. Give them your reasons, let them see your point of view, give them some education, and then listen to what they have to say. Genuinely listen to their part of the conversation, find out what their concerns are, give them the little bit of education points on what it is that they are concerned about. Maybe they're concerned about budget, right? So you set a budget and you stick within it. Maybe they're concerned about health risks and stuff like that. So what you do is you set in a sanitation plan, right? Which we'll talk about later. Listen to what it is that they have to say, what their concerns are, and try to address those concerns. Now, at the end of the day, after all of this, it's your dog, right? Again, if it's a spouse or significant other, then this is something that needs to be dealt with properly. But if it's just a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or your mom's giving you issues about it, or your grandma, or whoever, at the end of the day, it's your dog. And you get to feed your dog how you choose, right? Now, I 100% don't believe in vegan diets for dogs, but if you want to feed your dog a vegan diet, then I'm going to let you do that and respect you for it because it's your dog. If you want to feed your dogs raw foods, then your friends and family should respect that. But if they don't, it's your dog and it's your choice. Now let's move on to part 3 here. Okay, minimizing costs. Now, shopping discounts. And really quickly, anything that is an asterisk here, I do have available for free for you guys if you want to go to rawfeeding101.com/free. Okay, and you'll find the option to download these free resources here. Okay, anything with an asterisk, it's available for free at rawfeeding101.com/free. Okay, now shopping discounts. All right, shopping discounts are huge. Pretty much every major store, whether it's a Kroger store, whether it's a Walmart, whether it's a Sam's, whatever it happens to be, most major grocery store chains or anywhere that food is sold has some kind of manager special, or close out, or it's going to expire in 2 days kind of section, where the stuff that is getting close to expiration, or the stuff that they're just trying to get out for clearance, if it's not necessarily as fast perishable like meat, maybe it's something like canned oysters or something like that, but most places are going to have some kind of discount section. Anytime that you go into a store like that, check those sections out. Check out the manager special or discounted meats section. Check out the clearance section for things like canned oysters, canned sardines, those kinds of things. check these out and don't overlook them. Every time you go in, just pop in, just walk by, see if anything is worth it. If it is, pick it up, put it in the freezer for later. If it's not, cool, you checked and you used 30 seconds to try and save yourself some money, right? Now, co-ops. Co-ops, if you can find one, are going to be really one of the biggest differences that you can make in your raw feeding costs, because they come at significantly lower rates for food through co-ops than just about anywhere else. And what I want you guys to do is go over to keepthetailwagging.com, okay? And type in co-op. Up in the top right-hand corner at keepthetailwagging.com, there's a little magnifying glass search area, and I want you to type in co-op. And one of those articles are going to pop up. And in one of her co-op articles, this is from Kimberly Gauthier that runs this website, there is actually a list by state of the different co-ops, okay? And these are not all of them. These are ones that are just currently known and are currently put onto that article, okay? Now, again, co-ops are going to be your best friend. Sometimes they're not available for everybody, but if you have an available co-op and you're not using it, you are doing yourself a disservice. All right. So go to keepthetailwagging.com, type in co-ops in the search area, search at your state, and see what kind of co-ops are available in your area. Now, free food ads. Okay. Free food ads are basically where you're getting into a Facebook group, like an indoor yard sale group. Maybe you're getting on one of the new, community selling apps that are out now. Basically somewhere where people can make public postings. Maybe this is Craigslist, something like that, right? The idea where the general public is able to post different things for sale and post different things that are like, in search of kind of stuff. If you can put up templates like these, that's what I have for you guys at rawfeeding101.com/free, is a template for this. If you can put these up, you would be very surprised at the amount of free food that you can get, right? There are so many freezers out there that are full of food that people are not wanting to consume themselves anymore, but are more than willing to give you for free to get out of their hair because they want more freezer space, right? And this kind of goes into our next thing, which is hunters, hunting yourself, and farmers, right? Lots and lots of times, hunters will have, and farmers in this case too, will have animals that they take and won't be able to fit it in their freezer because they have so much left over from, the last year's hunt or 2 years ago's hunt, right? And they want to put the fresh stuff in there, the fresher stuff, I should say. Well, a lot of the times they don't know what to do with it and it ends up getting thrown away. But if in that indoor yard sale group, or if in that local hunters Facebook group, you have some options for, hey, I'll come and take this meat off of your hands, right? If you give them that option, I guarantee you can drop your raw feeding costs, okay? I can't literally legally guarantee you, but I have had students that have used this method and get hundreds of pounds of free food on a regular basis, okay? So do not be afraid to post these free food ads in indoor yard sale groups. Talk to your local hunters, become friends with your local hunters, become a hunter yourself, take advantage of all this meat that is out there in the world, okay? Now, friends and family, this is very similar. Do not hide the fact that you are feeding raw foods from your friends and family, okay? Friends and family are a great resource. We, again, have received hundreds of pounds of free meat simply because our friends, our family, our neighbors know that we feed this diet. And when they have things like, they're doing a freezer clean out because they're hunters. Maybe they are, maybe they have a freezer go out, like we've had very recently. One of our friends had a freezer go out. They know now who they can call to come and get all this meat that's going to go bad because they don't have anywhere to put it, right? It's a great, great resource. Do not miss out on this. And the last one is the 16 ways to save video. Again, this is available for free over at rawfeeding101.com/free. Okay. So do not miss out on this. It's a 30-minute video that goes into much more detail than we can here about all the 16 different ways that you can use to get free food and or reduced cost food. Okay, do not miss out on this. Again, students from my Raw Feeding 101 course and consultation clients, workshop students, tons and tons of people have literally gotten hundreds of pounds of free food using these methods. So do not miss out on this video. Now let's go ahead and check back here now that we've gone through a couple of parts. Let's check over here on YouTube, make sure we not missing any questions, which is good. And let's check over here, make sure we don't have any questions from our live viewers. Good. Okay. All right, let's continue here and go on to part 4. Okay. All right. Part 4, meal prepping. This is going to be one of our bigger sections. This is a big deal. Okay. Meal prepping, in my opinion, there's lots of people that feed raw foods successfully and they don't meal prep. But for me, living in 2019, it's necessary for a busy lifestyle. Now, again, I know lots of busy people that do not do it the same way and are successful at it. But for me, it's a much simpler process to follow, because what we are doing is we are preparing. It's the same as preparing meals for yourself ahead of time for the week. You're saving time. You don't have to spend the time to cook. You don't have to spend the time to put meals together, all those kinds of things. It's just there. That's what we want to do with meal prepping for our dogs, right? And that's really the why bother here of meal prepping, is it allows us to spend one chunk of time preparing a large amount of food for our dogs, so that later on in our daily lives, raw feeding is nothing but taking food out of the freezer and giving it to our dogs. You know, you want to give some time to defrost, obviously, which we'll talk about, but instead of having to put together meals every single day, all you have to do is pull a meal out and feed it to your dog or dogs. It's that simple. That's that easy. That's why we do it. Okay. Now, the importance of having a system. It's really important to have a system in place when it comes to your raw food meal prepping. And what do I mean by having a system? I don't mean some kind of computer program or software or anything like that. I mean a particular order and place for everything. So when I meal prep for my dogs, I know exactly where everything is because it's in the exact same place every single time. I know exactly what order I'm going to do things in, so I don't have to sit there and guess and say, okay, well, what's next now? Because I know what's next because I've done it 100 times. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to put more meals in faster, right? So I have a course student named Jamie, who is one of my favorite stories of successful course students, but that's besides the point here. And she has used this exact system to prep as many as 118 meals at a time. 118 meals at a time. Now, you're going to obviously have to have some freezer space for that, but 118 meals at a time in just a couple of hours. And I think it was 2 hours, her most recent time when she did 117 meals, took her about 2 hours. I mean, that is a lot of meals, right? That's a lot of meals. She has 2 dogs, and that's going to last her a good long amount of time. You know, it's going to last her close to 2 months. So she did 2 hours worth of meal prepping, 2 hours, once every 2-ish months. And all she has to do is pull food out of the freezer for her dogs every day to give them an amazing diet and an amazing life. That's why we meal prep. And that's why having a system is important, because doing the same things in the same order, having things in the same place every single time is what allows you to get faster, do more meals in a shorter amount of time so that you can get back to your life, right? So what is it that you will actually need? So obviously you're going to need the freezer, right? That we just talked about. You're going to need somewhere to put all this food. But besides that, what you're going to need equipment-ish wise is you're going to need gloves. Now, gloves is something where some people will say, and you can hear my dogs moving in the background, but proof I actually have dogs. Gloves. Some people say they're not necessary, and some people say that they're kind of a waste on an impact on the environment, which I do agree with. But at the same time, if we're trying to be as hygienic as possible, it goes a long way to being hygienic. It also allows us to be a little bit more flexible in our lives. So if I'm in the middle of meal prepping and, you know, I've got my hands in beef heart and everything else, right? And I get a phone call it's really hard to do that with hands that are covered in beef heart juices and all kinds of other stuff, right? If I've got gloves on, I can just set these things down, pop my gloves off, and answer my phone call. Or go to the front door where somebody just knocked on the front door and dropped off a FedEx package or whatever it happens to be, right? It gives us a little bit more flexibility. So you don't have to use them, but in my opinion, they're essential so that you can stay mobile in your life while you're doing this. It's, again, all about making meal prepping easier and making your raw feeding lifestyle easier. Pans and containers. Now you're going to need pans, which we'll talk about, which is where you put your food while you're meal prepping. You know, the bulks of your food. Here's all my meat chunks. Here's all my organ chunks. Here's all this other stuff, right? So the pans that are holding the food that you are about to build meals with, right? And then your containers being the things that we see like up here in the top right-hand corner that are, you know, the stuff that's going to actually hold the meals, go into the freezer, and be pulled out later on, okay? And I recommend that you use the smallest container possible. You know, don't have a lot of dead airspace in these containers. Only because the smaller the container that you can use to hold your dog's meals, the more of them that you can fit in the same freezer space, right? So if you have your dog's meals in a container, and let's say that you can fit 20 of them in your freezer, but 50%, you know, half of the container is empty because it's just way too big of a container, you could conceptually hold 40 meals in the same freezer space that you're holding 20 meals in right now, which means that you have to do meal prep half as often, which is what we're going for here, is making meals as little as possible to make it easier, less time from your life, and so on, right? Utensils. We need knives, cleavers, spoons, scoops, anything that you're going to use to help you build your meals. Now, for me, the only thing that I use anymore in this particular category is knives. I don't use cleavers. I don't use really spoons or scoops or anything like that, but they are used by a lot of people, and you may want to get some just in case. Most people have spoons and scoops and everything like that already in their kitchens, and knives, but if you want to get a cleaver, then go right ahead, which some people do if they aren't as familiar with separating bone from whole animals, those kinds of things. So a cleaver might be good for you. Another one could be kitchen shears. If you have, you know, wrist or hand or shoulder problems or something and using knives is uncomfortable for you, using kitchen shears, basically scissors for the kitchen, might be better for you as well. The student I was just talking about, Jamie, when she builds her meals, she uses kitchen shears. So they're definitely an option, okay? Now, again, your storage containers. The storage containers, or which we've already kind of covered here, I kind of put these into the same categories, but that's our little blue guys over here. It doesn't matter what color they are, obviously. But you do want to make sure that they are freezer-safe containers. And I don't recommend that you use anything like Ziploc bags or anything like that. They can leak really easy, which is a huge pain to come home and find that there's a bunch of frozen meat juices in your freezer because one of the bags ripped open. But it's also a huge impact on the environment. You can use really inexpensive, reusable, freezer-safe containers. We have freezer-safe Ziploc brand containers right now that are, again, freezer-safe. They look almost identical to this guy here on the bottom, and they're over 2 years old, and we've had one lid break because I dropped a dish on top of it. So they're very durable, very inexpensive. You can get a 2-pack of them at places like Walmart and Amazon for, you know, like a less than $2. So they're very inexpensive, and they greatly reduce your impact on the environment, which is a great thing. So the last thing that you're going to need here is a scale. You've got to have a scale if you're going to do raw feeding and meal prep in the way that we discussed in this video, because we're actually going to be weighing out our foods to make sure that we give our dogs the proper amounts of what it is that they need. I currently use a very inexpensive scale that came from Amazon, cost $11, and it's almost 3 years old now, I believe, and we've had to replace the battery in it twice. Other than that, it's worked flawlessly. Absolutely flawlessly. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and actually get started here. And this is going to be amazing. This is what's going to make your raw feeding possible for your busy lifestyle, because it's 2019 and I'm sure you have one. Step 1, entertainment and gloves. Yes, I said entertainment. Now, entertainment is important here because it makes raw feeding meal prep fun and not a chore. Whether for you that is turning on the TV because it's connected to your kitchen and you can watch TV while you do this. Maybe obviously be safe if you're using knives and look at what you're doing while you're using your knives and your shears and cleavers and stuff like that. But so there's the little disclaimer there. But have something that you can do to entertain yourself. Turn on the TV, turn on music. Maybe you put on a pair of Bluetooth headphones or earbuds and you watch your favorite or listen to your favorite Netflix or Hulu show, right? Make meal prepping time an entertaining kind of almost escape for you. You know, use it as a time where I get to relax a little bit, watch a show, listen to a TV show, listen to some music that I like and I've been wanting to catch up on, or some podcasts or something like that. And I'm also doing something amazing for my dogs all at the same time. It makes it much more of an enjoyable experience. And your gloves. Make sure that you don't just pull out one pair of gloves out of the box or something like that. Take the box out of the cupboard, set it on the counter in the same place, you know, have your system, put it somewhere where you know that they will be, so that if you have to take off your gloves because you need to answer the door, you need to answer the phone, you know exactly where to grab a new pair and they're right there readily available. So the first thing we are going to do food-wise is organs, okay? The 5% and the 5%, right? So this is talking about our, 80-10-5-5 model, right? 80% muscle meat, 10% bone, 5% liver, 5% non-liver organ in the diet, right? Now, why I do organs first is because they're easier to manage if they're still partially frozen. Now, if everything's defrosted and you don't want to do it in this order, then it's fine. But I always do organs first, even if they are past the partially frozen point, just because that's my system and I don't have to guess and I know what's next and I can do meal preps faster, right? Now, you just want to do one at a time and then the other one, right? So what we're going to do, let's just say that we're doing liver first. We weigh out our liver. Let's say that we need 1.25 ounces of liver. Okay, that's what our raw feeding 101 calculator that we got from Scott for free at rawfeeding101.com/free says that my dog should have for organs, right? So we weigh out 1.25 ounces of liver, but we do that as many times as we can, right? And what do I mean by that? So part of your system here is, again, having everything in the same place all at the same time. So here's my system and what it looks like. Over on my kitchen table is where I have all my foods that's defrosted, right? Over on my counter, on the left-hand side of where I stand, is my stove, which is where I put my food pans. And I fill all of those food pans with the stuff that I'm going to use to build my meals with. Meat chunks, bone content, liver, other non-liver organs, tripe, fish, heart, all these different things that I'm going to be adding to my dog's diet, right? They go into these containers on my left-hand side. In front of me is where I have my cutting board, my knife, my scale, those kinds of things. On the right-hand side is an empty counter space where I have my food containers where the actual meals are going to go into. And that particular container, or that particular counter, will hold 10 different containers of the size of containers that I have to have. So what I will do is I will, with every item, as I'm going through this list, as I'm going through my meal preps, I will do that food item for all the containers all at once. So I'll take that 1.25 ounces of liver and do it 10 times. So I cut out 1.25 ounces of liver, put it on the scale, make sure that it's 1.25 ounces, put it in a container. And I do that 9 more times. Now all the containers have liver in them. And then I repeat that process with the other organ. So let's say that it's beef kidney. Okay. I take beef kidney, weigh out 1.25 ounces 10 times, put them in the container. Weigh it out, put it in the container. Weigh it out, put it in the container. Weigh it out, put it in the container. Makes it really, really easy to keep track of, to make sure that your meals aren't missing something, right? Now this part seems kind of backwards, I know, but again, the only reason that I do this step next of filling the food pans after I do the organs is the organs are easier to deal with when they are partially frozen. Now, if everything is already way, way defrosted and it's not going to matter, then fill your food pans first and then do your organs, okay? But the next step is filling your food pans, all right? separating bone content like whole animals, ducks or rabbits or whatever it is, cutting racks of ribs apart into single ribs, separating quarters if you're going to separate chicken quarters and stuff like that, or duck quarters into drumsticks and thighs and so on. You're going to be cutting you're going to be cutting meat into smaller chunks. If your dog is a gulper, for example, let's say that you have a pork roast of some kind, you're going to be cutting it into smaller cubes, that kind of thing. And you're going to be removing additions to the diet like fish, like tripe, like heart, those kinds of things from their packaging, putting them into a food pan as well. Basically, you're getting all the stuff that you are going to need to build your dog's diet in one place right in front of you, okay? Or in my case, right to the left of me. Now, the next step that we are going to move on to here is bone content, okay? The 10%. The 10% is our bone content, which again, you can get your amounts from with the bone content calculator that you can get at rawfeeding101.com/free, and using the bone content percentages that can be found over at our friend Ronnie Lejeun's website, perfectlyrawsome.com. It's the best and most reliable source of bone percentage information that I have found in the web. Adding it to the storage container, right? Our meal prep containers, our blue guys over here into the containers, right? So what we're doing is we are taking, for an example, let's say that we are having a 9-ounce pork rib because we need 3 ounces of bone, which is this example that we're looking for down here, or that we're seeing down here. We're adding, in this particular meal, for this particular dog, we need 3 ounces of bone per day, right? And we have ourselves, conveniently, a 9-ounce pork rib, which is approximately 1/3 or 33% bone, which again, you can find over at perfectlyrawsome.com. But, so we have 3 ounces of bone in this pork rib, and we do this again 10 times. We go through, we have a pork rib, we put it into the container. We go through, we have a pork rib, we put it in the container, and we put it in the container. Now, this doesn't have to be exact. If you, let's say that you put that pork rib onto your scale, and it is 10 ounces, so it's 3.3 ounces of bone, it's not a big deal. It's not that big of a deal because we can balance these things over time. If you have to have, 4 ounces of bone in a meal, then the next meal that will be fed the next day just put slightly lower amount of bone content in it. It's really easy. It does not have to be an exact science here, okay? But you don't want to be going crazy and putting like a 12 ounce or 12, 16 ounce, some crazy amount of pork rib in there, and then have, 4, 5, 6 ounces of bone. That's probably too much to have in one day and will constipate your dog and so on, but it doesn't have to be spot on 3 ounces, okay? So now we have this 9-ounce pork rib in all 10 of our containers, right? Right. And now we are ready to move on to the last portion here, which is going to be meat content. And at this point, again, we've got our liver content, which is 5%. We have our non-liver organ content, which is 5%. And we have our bone content, which is 10%, which is that 3 ounces of our pork rib. Well, we also have the 6 ounces of meat that was on that pork rib, which we'll talk about in a minute, okay? Now, the meat content is really our last piece of the puzzle. All right, the leftover amount of food that we have to put into, and we'll do a little math overview here in a moment so that all makes sense. But we're going to take everything that we need that is left for this particular meal weight-wise, and we are going to fill our containers with it. And what we're going to do this is with our plate or whatever it is that we are using to set on top of the scale to weigh our foods, we will weigh out that additional amount of meat. Okay, so let's just go ahead and pop forward here into our math examples so that we can explain this a little bit. All right, so let's say that through this meal that we've been talking about here, it's a total of 22.25 ounces. All right, this is approximately, I believe, if I remember, this is a meal for an 83-pound dog. Okay, so let's say that they need 22.25 ounces in this total meal. Everything that goes into this meal is the is getting tripped up here. The 22.25 ounces is everything. All of our bone content, liver content, organ content, meat content, all of it needs to weigh 22.25 ounces. Okay. The first thing that we did was our organs, which was a total of 2.5 ounces, right? 1.25 ounces of meat or of organ each. 1.25 ounces of liver, 1.25 ounces of kidney. When we put these things together, it's 2.5 ounces. That leaves us with 20 ounces left that needs to go into this meal, right? So we started with 22.25. We had 2.5 ounces of organ, which was 1.25 ounces of liver and kidney, which leaves us with 20 ounces left that needs to go into this meal. Then we added our 9-ounce pork rib, okay? And we know, because of our friends at Perfectly Rawsome, that a pork rib is approximately 1/3 or 33% bone, right? Which means that this is approximately 3 ounces of bone and 6 ounces of meat, which leaves us at 11 ounces left. And that's where our 80% comes in. It is the last piece of the puzzle, okay? We need to make up the rest of the 11 ounces of our meal with nothing but our meat content, right? So this is where I will go through a process of adding things into the diet that all come into the meat category. And I will do it in a very specific order because I include things in my dog's diets to do certain things for them, like providing omega-3s and so on. I make sure that those are included in the meat. So this is what I do. With my 80% muscle meat content, I will start with a couple of ounces of fish, a couple of ounces of heart, 1 or 2 different muscles depending on the size of the muscle, and then finishing the rest of the 11 ounces out in this specific example with the meat content that I had. Let's say that it's pork chunks, right? So in this example, I would add 2 ounces of fish to make sure that I'm getting enough omega-3s. I would add 2 ounces of heart to make sure that I'm having a good source of things like taurine and so on, right? Then I'm adding in some tripe. Maybe I add 1 ounce of tripe, maybe I add in 2 ounces of tripe. Great source of healthy fats, great calcium phosphorus balance. And then I finish the rest of this 11 ounces off with my pork chunks, okay? So what you add into this is going to be different, but that's the order that I use, and that's how we finish off the diet, right? We start out with 22.25 ounces. We add in our organs, which leaves us with 20 ounces. We have 20 ounces, which then we put in our 9-ounce pork rib, which leaves us with 11 ounces. And with this 11 ounces, we are adding in things that benefit our dog. We are adding in fish, we are adding in heart, tripe, muscles, and other meat content like pork chunks or beef chunks or chicken chunks or turkey chunks or whatever they happen to be, right? Cut up pieces of muscle tissue. Now, our meals are done, right? Our meals are done. We have all of our food in them. We have all of them weighed out. Everything is great, good to go. Now it's time for us to get these containers into the freezer, right? We put our lids on and we get them in the freezer. Now, what I recommend that you do is you don't have to do this in the beginning because it might be a little bit overwhelming for you. But what I recommend is that you have 2 different meals that you rotate between throughout the time frame that you make your meals for, whether it's a week, a month, whatever it happens to be. What I mean by that is having, let's say on the right-hand side of your freezer, it's these kinds of meals, and the left-hand side of your freezer, it's these kinds of meals. So one of them has what we've been talking about here, where you're using, beef organs with a pork rib, pork for your bone source, pork for your chunks, your meat content, and then all the other stuff that we add to our meals like fish, tripe, heart, and so on. Then over on the other one, we have something completely different. So we have something like lamb ribs, or let's just go with that example. We have lamb ribs for our bone content. We have let's just say that we have beef organs again, because it's easy. But we have beef chunks for our main meat source here, and then our fish, our heart, our tripe, our muscles, and so on. The whole point being to give your dog some rotation. So, Monday you pull from the right side of the shelf. Tuesday, you pull from the left. Wednesday, the right. Thursday, the left, and so on, to give your dog some rotation. Now, once you have finished all your meals, all 10 of your meals in my case, are filled with food, and it's time to put them in the freezer, this is where you need to evaluate your freezer space and the amount of containers you have. Because our whole point here is to make as many meals as possible at one time so that we don't have to do it for as long of a period of time as possible. So if you have more freezer space and you have more containers and you have more food, then make more meals. Start this process over. Make sure your food pans are filled. By this time your organs are going to be all defrosted, but make sure that your food pans are full again. Do your organs, do your bone content, do your meat content, put the labels and lids on top of your containers and put those ones in the freezer. Then reevaluate again. Do I have more freezer space? Do I have more food? Do I have more containers? Yes, yes, and yes. Okay, I'm making more meals then. And you start over again. The whole point being here is that while you have the food out, while the food is defrosted, while you have your food pans and your dirty dishes all in front of you anyways, now it's time to get as many meals made as possible. Make as many meals as you possibly can all at once. Okay. Now, this is where the cleanup and sanitation comes in, which is huge. One of the things that people, excuse me, outside the raw feeding community like to do is say that, we're going to get ourselves sick, our dog sick, our baby sick, our grandma sick, we're going to get everybody sick because we are feeding raw foods to our dogs. This is where common sense sanitation and cleanup processes prevent us from doing those things, right? So all of our dishes should be thoroughly washed, preferably immediately, but sometimes life happens and you can't really do it. So at least rinse your stuff off, make sure that there's no, meat chunks on stuff or fish juice sitting in a container. Rinse your stuff off and do your dishes as soon as possible, right? Throw away any leftover packaging. Let's say that you had the package that your fish came in, or the package that your heart came in, or your pork chunks, or whatever it happens to be. Get all these guys off of your kitchen table, wherever they happen to be, and put them into the garbage, right? And get all of the leftover food into the freezer, okay? And we address this right over here. Everything goes in the freezer. Forgot that part. My apologies. But everything needs to go back into the freezer that you didn't use meat-wise, food-wise. So let's say that you had leftover pork chunks and leftover organs and leftover everything else, but you didn't have more containers or you were out of freezer space, right? You need to make sure that you leave yourself some freezer space to put the stuff that you still have available back into the freezer. So, make sure that they're all dry, make sure they don't have juices on them, and get them back into the freezer and basically clear your kitchen table. Get all your kitchen table, wherever it is that you're meal prepping, get it gone, get it back into the freezer. Then what we want to do is dry these surfaces. All the surfaces that had our raw foods on it, everything like that, they need to be sanitized, or they need to be dried first. Because if they are covered in juices, covered in water that have been exposed to these juices and everything else, if we try to sanitize them now, we're just going to be spreading stuff around. So we need to dry them off first. They don't need to be bone dry, but we need to make sure that there's not puddles of stuff everywhere, right? So take some paper towels, whatever it happens to be, dry everything off. Next, sanitize all your surfaces, and I mean all of your surfaces that you or the raw food came into contact with. You being having juices on your hands and that kind of stuff. If you touched your scale while you had a glove on that had juices on, you need to sanitize your scale, which I recommend you do anyways. Sanitize your scale, wipe it down with either a rag or a paper towel that has been sprayed with some kind of sanitizing agent, or use things like sanitizing wipes. Whatever it happens to be, if you want to use homemade stuff, then you can do that as well. I haven't done it, so I can't guarantee the effectiveness of this, but whatever cleaning products that you use around the house to sanitize surfaces, sanitize everything. The kitchen table, the oven, your counters, your sink faucets, literally everything that came into contact with raw food or raw food juices, or you that had touched the raw food and then touched that. Sanitize everything, okay? Next, take out the trash. Just take out the trash. Super, super simple. Get all those containers, those empty containers of raw food and raw food juices, and get them outside. Now, if you can, obviously, having somebody help you do this and having somebody open the door is best. But if you can't, make sure that you use a sanitary wipe or something afterwards to wipe down the doorknobs. Whatever it is that you touch, make sure that it gets wiped down and sanitized again. Now, lastly, wash your hands. Super simple. Everybody's been hearing this since kindergarten. Everywhere you go in public, you see this, wash your hands, prevent the spread of disease, blah, blah, blah. Make sure that you are washing your hands. And now this is kind of where some people get themselves in trouble, which is why I have this little note down here. Use a sanitary wipe or a family member to turn on the sink. Because if you just sanitized all your surfaces and then went to take out the trash and you were responsible and wiped your sink too, or not your sink, excuse me, you wiped your doorknobs as well afterwards because maybe you didn't have somebody to help you, but then you touch your faucets again to wash your hands, you just recontaminated potentially the sink and the faucets. So you need to either use a wipe, a sanitary wipe, to turn the sink on for you so that you can wash your hands, or have a friend or family member do it for you so that you don't have to touch those faucets with your potentially contaminated hands, right? All right, here we are at the portion of our workshop where we are going to take a 5-minute intermission here really quickly. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure that we don't have any of our live viewers that are having questions. And it doesn't look like we have anybody really over here on YouTube anyways. It looks like everybody's over here, which is normal, having everybody over in the Raw Feeding 101 school. Okay, so let's go ahead then and take our 5-minute intermission here. It looks like we are sitting at 12:58 my current time. So what we are going to do is start the clock right now, and I will see you guys back here in just a moment at looks like we'll say 1:04. And again, if you are going to be, and let's just go ahead and stop our screen share really quick. Not the broadcast. Don't stop the broadcast. Stop the screen sharing. You can just see this guy really quickly. Maybe it'll pop over into my mug here. There we go. I'll see you guys in 5 minutes and we'll continue and finish out this workshop. Okay. And again, if you're watching this on the replay, this should just immediately skip to where we are starting off again. So you don't have to just watch 5 minutes of silence. But starting right now, I'll see you in about 5 minutes, which is going to say about 1:04. So 5 minutes from now, I will be back with you guys and we will finish out our workshop. All right, everybody, we are back to the workshop here. And if you are watching the replay, then it just basically jumped forward and we're here again. So let's go ahead and start sharing our screen and talk about the big portion of this particular event, which is actually making the transition. Okay. So let's go ahead and share the screen now. And it's going all crazy on us, which is good. And here we are. Let's just check to make sure we don't have a comment over here. All right, good. And we are good over here. Awesome. Looks like everybody, again, is watching over on the workshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this tab out for us. All right, let's go ahead and get started on the actual transition. Your 4-week transition success plan. Now, this plan is set up to make sure that your dog has as little chance as possible of having digestive upset during the transition. Okay, and this is my preferred method. There's other methods out there, but this one has helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Raw Feeding 101 course students. This is what I teach to all my consultation clients. This is what I teach to people that go through my 6-week transition program. This is by far what I have seen to be one of the best ways to approach the transition because it has the lowest chance of causing digestive upset and having diarrhea and those kinds of things. So let's get started here and look at what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering how the transition is set up, slow versus balance from the start. We're going to be checking out 80-10-5-5. Is it perfect or no? Figuring out feeding amounts and frequency, getting the right amount of bone, supplements to consider before starting, the 24-hour fast, again for adults only. We'll talk about puppies separately. The first meal, and week 1, week 2/step 2, week 2/step 3, week 4/step 4, what to add immediately after the transition, what you need to be doing, what you have to be doing after the initial transition is over. We'll be talking about transitioning puppies, and we'll also be talking about something else here at the end about stuff that we weren't able to cover. So let's get started here. How is this transition set up? Slow versus balance from the start. For adult dogs, and puppies are again different. This is why until I say now we're talking about puppies, we're talking about adults. So for adults, I don't like doing balance from the start because the dogs don't need it, and it has a much higher chance of causing problems digestive wise. So if you take somebody that has been eating, say, nothing but processed foods, right? Transition or comparing that to kibble. Somebody has nothing but transition foods or processed foods like pizza and all this other stuff. Then you switch them to a lower fat, high quality proteins, the classic veggies and chicken breast and rice, high fiber, just a really good solid diet, organic, all these beautiful, beautiful things. That person, even though they're now getting really, really good high quality foods, is probably going to spend some time on the porcelain throne on the toilet because their body is not used to those foods. It's the same thing with our dogs. If you take your dog straight off of kibble and you give them all these amazing foods all at once, they're almost guaranteed to have some kind of digestive problem. Some of them are very minor, some of them are not minor, and maybe you have that lucky perfect dog that didn't have any of those problems, but they're few and far between. That's why I like to go through this slow 4-week transition plan that sets dogs up for success and their owners as well. Now, the 80-10-5-5 model that we talked about in meal prepping, is it perfect or no? No, it is not. It is not, but it is a perfect place to start, a perfect place to base our diets on and build from, which we will talk about in the what now section and what we will talk about in the what we weren't able to cover section, okay? Because those two things are necessary to make sure that you are feeding your dog a proper diet. Now, figuring out feeding amounts and frequency and getting the right amount of bone. These things I want to mention really quick and say that they are available over at rawfeeding101.com/free. You can get those resources. You can get the free feeding amount calculators and you can get the bone content calculators for free, okay? That's why those asterisks are there. I just wanted to remind you. Now, feeding amounts and frequency, okay? What I want you guys to do with this model is start at 2% of your dog's weight and observe and adjust. Using the 80-10-5-5 model, going through and following the transition plan that we're going to go through here in a minute, start them off at 2%, okay? Now, if you have a dog that is excessively overweight and you're trying to get weight off of them, consider starting at 1.5% of their current weight. And if you have a dog that is needing to put on some weight, maybe you adopted an underweight former shelter dog or a former stray or something like that, and they're just deathly skinny and need to put on weight, then maybe consider feeding 3% or more until they reach an ideal weight, okay? But the whole point of this is to observe and adjust. Every dog is different. You need to observe and adjust. These are just guidelines. And again, you can get your guidelines over at rawfeeding101.com/free with the free calculators that are over there. You just pop in your dog's weight and it'll push out all of these numbers, okay? Now, again, use the included calculators. We have them available in pounds and ounces or grams and kilograms. So no matter where it is that you're from, it's applicable and you can use them. This is both the feeding amount calculator and the bone content calculator. It's available in pounds, ounces, and grams and kilograms. And now, feeding frequency is a personal call based on you and your dog, right? Once a day versus twice a day or more. I choose once a day, not twice a day. Not because I think that once a day is, you know, socially better or something like that. I think that it has benefits in every aspect. Feeding once a day is better for you, the person, because it's one mess you have to clean up every day. It's easier for meal prepping. You don't have to use two different meals for 1 day's worth of feeding, which makes you be able to make less meals, use less freezer space, have less freezer space, and so on. So it's easier that way as well. Now, for the dog, it's easier and better because their body has to go through digestion once a day, right? They're not constantly digesting food like free-fed, kibble-fed dogs are, which doesn't give their body any time to put energy into fixing issues, addressing diseases, because a large majority of their body's energy all throughout the day, 24 hours a day, is being used for digesting food. So by using the concept of intermittent fasting, which is basically just feeding them during one time window, we allow our dogs to have a much better chance at avoiding all kinds of health issues. So what I do is I feed my dogs in the evening once a day. They'll get little T words and stuff like that throughout the day when they do something good, or they come into the house really easily when I tell them to. But food wise, actual meal wise, they get food once a day in the evening. The whole beginning of the day, they fast, and they are full of energy. They're crazy dogs. I mean, they have so much energy. They are not hurting. It does not bother them. And they are benefiting health-wise from the intermittent fasting and not having to constantly process food. Helps with avoiding obesity, helps with avoiding cancer, addressing current diseases in the body, fixing potential issues that may come up. I mean, there's so many benefits to fasting. You should look into it, but that's why I personally feed once a day. And because of my crazy busy lifestyle, running rawfeeding101.com and other dog food related ventures, it's easier for me personally to feed once a day. It's easier for me to make meals for 1 day. One container is one meal for one dog. Much simpler to do. So let's move on. Getting the right amount of bone. Again, using the daily amount calculators, using the bone content calculators, these are going to be your best friend. Okay. Now, start at 10%, but some dogs may need as much as 12 to 14%. This is going to be something, again, that you need to adjust over time with. So let's say that you use the calculators in combination with the bone percentages over at perfectlyrawsome.com, and you find that the 10% just isn't working. Your dog is still having some loose stools, but everything else seems fine. Consider bumping that up to 12%. Don't change anything else in the diet, like take something else away. Like don't change the 80% meat content to 78 so that you can change the bone content to 12. Just feed them 12% bone instead of 10%. Easy math there that the calculator will help you with. Okay, now using the content or the bone content calculator in combination with Perfectly Rawsome, get these numbers together really super easy. Again, all you have to do is punch in the weight of the particular food item and what it is, and you get all these numbers. But the most important thing here is to observe and adjust. If the 10% isn't enough, you need to move up to 12. If the 12% isn't enough, you need to move up to 14. If you're up to 14% and you're still having loose stools, then it's not a bone content problem most likely, and you are having some other kind of issue, which you can reach out to me for, you can reach out to the community. There's lots of options, but that's what's most important. Observe and adjust. And don't forget, as a side note, when you are doing your raw food meal preps, don't forget to use the meat content from that meaty bone as part of your meal. Meaning, like in the example we talked about earlier, don't, with that 9-ounce pork rib, when we had 20 ounces left in our meal, we had a 9-ounce pork rib. Don't forget to count the 6 ounces of meat that are in there towards your dog's meat content. Excuse me. If you do, what's going to happen is your dog's going to start to gain weight over time, and you're not going to know why, because you're following this diet with ideal amounts and everything, when really what's going on is you're feeding your dog 6 more ounces of meat every day than you think you are, because you forgot to count the meat that's on the meaty bone as part of your dog's meat content. Quick drink of water there. All right, now let's move on to supplements to consider before starting. Digestive enzymes and slippery elm bark. The brands that I recommend right now for digestive enzymes are Mercola, and the brand that I recommend right now for slippery elm bark is the Now brand. You can find it pretty much everywhere, Walmart, online, everywhere. The Mercola digestive enzymes, those are going to be on Amazon. Now, the digestive enzymes are helpful because they set your dog's body up for this new diet. So what happens is your dog's body has certain digestive enzymes that let it digest different kinds of food. Different kinds of food, meaning proteins, excuse me, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, right? Well, these all require different digestive enzyme to do. If your dog has been getting a very high carbohydrate diet, like they would on kibble, another drink of water there, what's going to happen is it can impact your dog's production of the other digestive enzymes that break down and digest fats and protein. So when they go onto a diet that's higher in protein, as an example, like a raw food diet, sometimes they have digestive upset because they're not making enough of the digestive enzymes that help break down protein. By feeding a digestive enzyme a couple of days before you start the transition, you can help kind of counterbalance this problem and start putting in some of these different types of digestive enzymes that will help your dog digest this protein, like protease. Protease is one of these digestive enzymes. Slippery elm bark. Slippery elm bark is something that you can either use proactively, just as a preventative measure, or you can use it reactively. And what it does is it's going to help you with diarrhea. Specifically, it can also help with constipation, but in this example with the transition, it's going to be more helpful for diarrhea most likely. What it does is it lubricates the digestive tract and reduces inflammation, which are problems with diarrhea. So if your dog has an inflamed digestive system because it's upset because of all this new food, you can provide it some slippery elm bark and help it firm up its stools and start having normal stools again. Okay. So I highly consider you guys get these things before you start the transition. They're not necessary, they're not required, but I highly recommend having them on hand and using them. All right. Now, the 24-hour fast, again, adults only. The 24-hour fast, in my opinion, is something that every adult dog should do before they make the transition. It does a couple of different things. One, if you are feeding the digestive enzymes, it's one day where this high amount of carbohydrates isn't coming in, which is a good thing. But the main thing that we are trying to do is completely clean the slate, have your dog's stomach completely empty. We want them to be hungry in case they have some kind of, not starving because they're not going to be after one day, but hungry so that if they do have some like, oh, I don't know about this isn't what I normally consume, they'll be hungry enough to kind of overcome that apprehension of wanting to try the raw food. And it helps us start to address a pH problem in your dog's stomach. Now, what happens is that the pH, or the acidity level in your dog's stomach, is one of the things that is necessary for properly digesting bone content. What happens is that when your dog has bone come into their body, the gastric acids will actually start to break down the calcium that is inside of the bones. This prepares them for digestion farther down the line in the intestines. If your dog doesn't have an acidic enough or a low enough pH for this to happen, it can cause digestive issues. So, and this is made much worse by kibble. Kibble actually has the ability to impact your dog's acidity level in their stomach acid. And that makes the transition that much harder. So by giving your dog a 24-hour fast to start coming back from that and start lowering its pH, making it more acidic, your dog's not going to have as much problems digesting bones. So I highly, highly recommend the 24-hour fast. In fact, I would dare say for an adult dog, I wouldn't recommend starting the diet without a 24-hour fast with an adult dog. All right, first meal here. This is the biggie, guys. This is the big one. The first meal, week 1, step 1. You are going to be nervous. Just like we talked about at the very beginning of this workshop, you are going to be nervous. It's going to happen, okay? You just need to push through it, get it done, start the meal, okay? And in this meal, in this first meal, and what you're going to be feeding throughout week 1 is going to be a white meat bone-in source, okay? A white protein, like chicken, turkey, rabbit, a white meat protein source with the bone in. Okay, this could be quarters, drumsticks, thighs, and wings, necks, and meat from chicken. This could be turkey, necks, wings, tips, and meat from turkey, and basically everything from rabbit. And the reason that I say meat here at the end is because there's not going to be a lot of things that have the proper meat to bone ratio to meet your 80% and your 10%. Okay. And what I mean by that is if we are looking at, again, a pork rib. Okay, let's say pork rib. No, that's not a good example because it's not white. Let's say a chicken quarter. Okay, a chicken quarter is 27% bone, if memory serves. 27% bone is way too high of a bone content for your dog, most likely, without other foods in there, which means that you're going to have to add other meat to make it an 80-10 ratio, right? So the reason, again, that I put meat here is to say that you're going to have to add meat to whatever white meat bone source you choose to make it fit the 80-10 model. Now, if allergies exist for everything that's above, chicken, turkey, rabbit, so on, you can go with some more exotic birds like quail and other things, and as a last resort with a blander red meat like pork, but try these other things first. If you have known allergies or intolerances, that's one thing, but try these things first, okay? Now, during this week 1, step 1 portion, okay, only feed the 90% portion of the diet, meaning don't feed extra meat or extra bone to make up for the missing 10% because we're not feeding the organs yet. Just feed them the 90%, the 80% meat content and the 10% bone content, okay? They will be fine without the other 10% calorie-wise in their diet for a week. They'll be totally fine. Most dogs in America and around the world have a few pounds to lose anyways, okay? But most importantly, don't move on until your dog is doing well. If your dog is still having problems and is adjusting, and maybe you ordered some slippery elm bark to help, or maybe you ordered some digestive enzymes to help and it's day 7, so it's going to be time to move on the next day to week 2 or step 2, don't. Wait for your dog to be doing well on the current step that you are on before you move forward, or you're just going to compound the problem, which we don't want to do. Now, week 2, step 2, adding in red meats, okay? This is going to be things like beef, pork, duck, lamb, goat, kangaroo, if you have access to that kind of stuff. But this is where we're going to start to add in other protein sources, and you're only going to want to pick one of them. So either pick beef or pork or duck or lamb. Don't add all these things together at once, okay? We want to introduce our dogs to new foods slowly, which is the whole point of this transition method, which is why it's so successful for so many people. Now, you want to shoot for approximately, it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, none of this has to be perfect, but shoot for about half and half white meat to red meat. Half of the meat that you have in these meals in week 2 be white meat, the other half be red meat. So let's say that you're feeding a chicken quarter, but you need several more ounces of meat to make it an 80-10 ratio. Make the other meat that you add in red meat, okay? Now, still only feed the 90% during week 2 and step 2. Don't add in extra calorie. Don't add extra bone. Don't add extra meat to make up for the missing 10% from the liver and non-liver organ. Just feed the 90%, okay? And again, do not move on until your dog is doing well. Don't move on until your dog is doing well. don't move on until your dog is doing well. Can you tell I don't want you to move on until your dog is doing well? This is really important because some people try to rush themselves through the transition, which ends up being a pain for them because they have messes to clean up, ends up being a pain for the dog because they're uncomfortable. Just don't rush it. Let your dog's body tell you when to do it. I had a Raw Feeding 101 course student who had to basically triple the transition period because they had such a sensitive dog. But now the dog is on just about everything that every other dog on a raw food diet is consuming. But she did the smart thing and listened to her dog's body and gave her dog's body the time that it needed to adjust to these new foods. So don't move on until your dog is doing well. Now, this is where things get tricky. Week 3, step 3, adding in liver, the first 5%. So now we're feeding the 95%, right? If you are going to experience digestive upset, or I guess your dog is going to experience digestive upset during the transition, it's going to be now. It's going to be in week 3, step 3. So there are some dogs that have 0 issues during the transition. There are some dogs that have 0 issues for the first 2 weeks of the transition. But the stats say, I'm going to say my stats because of my experience of helping thousands of people do this, that this is where people have problems if they have problems, is when they start to add in organs because they're so rich. All right. Now, we want to start with liver here because it's one of the most nutrient dense things on the planet. Nutrient dense meats on the planet, period, which is why they're so valued by native cultures and stuff like that. So we want to start with the liver, and you preferably want to start with the liver of an animal that you're already feeding. Okay, what do I mean by that? So if you are feeding chicken quarters and beef chunks, as an example, for your first two weeks of the transition, pick one of those 2 animals to get the liver from. The reason that we want to do this is because we want to avoid the complication of a potential protein intolerance. What do I mean by that? So let's say that you are feeding your chicken, and there's no problems, which, in this scope says that your dog doesn't have a problem with chicken. And you're feeding the beef. If you're feeding the beef and there's no problems, it means that in this scope, your dog doesn't have any problems with beef. Now let's say that you add in pork liver instead of chicken or beef liver, and all of a sudden your dog starts having problems. Now we don't know if your dog is having digestive problems because they're sensitive. We don't know if they're having digestive problems because you tried too much liver at once. We don't know if they're having digestive problems because they have a protein intolerance to pork. It just puts too many additional X factors. I don't know why that's happening. It puts too many additional X factors into the diet that we don't want to deal with, and we just skipped forward for some reason. It puts too many other X factors into the diet. So what we want to do is stick with the liver from an animal that we're already feeding, so that the only thing that we have to look at is, are we feeding too much of it, and that's why my dog's having problems, or are they just sensitive to it because it's a really rich new food, which we can deal with those things easily, right? And what I want you to do is start with 25% of your dog's daily amount. So let's say that you have to feed 1 ounce of liver to your dog every day, right? That's what the calculators are telling you. Start with 1/4 of an ounce or 0.25 ounces and see how your dog does on that. And then throughout the week, as you get towards the end of week 3, hopefully if everything is going well, you should be at the full amount, the full 1 ounce. Again, slowly increase throughout the week until your dog is doing well on the full 1 ounce. And again, remember that this is where digestive upset is going to happen. If it's going to happen, don't rush it, don't force it, and don't move on until your dog is doing well. If it takes your dogs 2 weeks to adjust to liver, then that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you don't move on until your dog is adjusted and doing well, especially in this step, okay? Now, week 4, you already got kind of a little preview of there for some reason. Adding non-liver organ. This is going to be kidney. This is going to be spleen. This is going to be pancreas. This is going to be sweetbreads, testicles, ovaries, and so on, right? This is the exact same process as week 3. I want you to realize that your dog could experience digestive upset because it's a new, extremely rich food, especially if it's something like pancreas. Pancreas and spleen are very rich. Realize that you should feed one of these things. A kidney is probably the easiest for you to find, or spleen or something, from an animal that you're already feeding, so that we don't have to add another potential factor into the problem with having to consider a protein intolerance. And I want you to start at 25% of your dog's daily amount and work to the full amount throughout the week, or whatever amount of time that it takes for your dog to get used to that. Okay. Again, if it takes a week and it's just the full week 4, perfect. If it takes 2 weeks, perfect. Just don't move on and don't force it. Don't rush it. This is where digestive upset can happen. Give your dog the support and the time that they need. If you need to intervene by adding things like slippery elm bark, which is really easy to make, you just take a tablespoon and add it to a cup and a half of boiling water, make it into a paste, and start feeding a tablespoon of that with your dog's meals, and it should help them firm up their stools. Really, really easy. But the point here is, do not move on until your dog is ready to move on. Don't start adding new things to their diet until they're okay with this, okay? Now, what do you need to add immediately after the transition? So you're through your first 4 weeks. Your dog is on raw foods officially. You are epic and you are awesome, but there's still stuff that you need to add to their diets, okay? What I want you to do first is you need to get an omega-3 source into your dog's body. Omega-3s are essential. And what essential means, obviously, is that it's necessary, but it means that your dog can't get it from anywhere other than their diet. They can't take something else into their body and convert it into omega-3s like that. It has to be in their diet. They can't turn, vitamin C into omega-3s or something like that. What you want to do, I prefer, is using whole oily fish. This could be things like sardines. This could be mackerel. This could be salmon. There's tons and tons of different whole oily fish on the market. You could use smelt that you can pick up from local Asian market stores. I mean, there's so many different whole oily fish out there that's my preferred method. Now, you can also use oils. Oils like fish oil, cod liver oil, squid oil. These are going to be more expensive of an option to get quality sources in a lot of cases. But if you do choose to go with oils, I recommend that you go with a small container, because what happens with oils sometimes is they get exposed to oxygen and then they oxidize, which basically means that they go rancid and then they make your dog sick. So what you want to do is get smaller bottles, smaller containers, so that they aren't in your fridge as long and don't have as much opportunity to oxidize and go rancid. You want to get dark colored containers to, again, avoid oxidation and it going rancid from sunlight and other light. And if at all possible, you want to get glass containers to avoid different toxins from the plastic being leached into the oil, which then gets into your dog. Okay, so small, dark colored, if at all possible, glass containers if you're going to use oils. And again, these options are a lot more expensive in most cases than using whole oily fish, which is why I say whole oily fish is better, because it's cheaper, but it's also more natural in that it's just food, right? Now, the oils are coming from foods, but they're going through other processes and being processed and so on. So I prefer whole oily fish. Now, reproductive foods. Reproductive foods are one of the best tools in your tool belt that you have. They are going to help you fill in nutritional holes in your dog's diet. Okay, and what do I mean by reproductive foods? Reproductive foods are foods that either sustain a life on their own or create a life on their own. So raw milk is something that, most mammals are using to keep their young alive. Looking at cows as an example. Now, I'm no cow expert, but for a certain period of time, that is what that calf is using to stay alive. Nothing but raw milk is keeping this, relatively giant animal alive until it starts getting to the point where it can eat grasses and so on. But it is a food that in its entirety sustains a life, okay? and it's argued to be one of the most complete and bioavailable foods on planet Earth. And it's really important for all these reproductive foods that they be as high quality sourced as possible, because getting the lower quality sources of these things can basically make them null and void, right? So feed organic, pasture raised raw milks. Okay. And it seems like they would be expensive, but with it just being milk, it's not really that expensive, and you don't need very much of it either, which is a good thing. Same situation with eggs. Now, eggs produce a life all on their own. Literally everything that is necessary for life is inside of an egg. A chicken comes out of an egg. There was just basically this little, pod of goo. A chicken, a quail, a turkey, a duck, all these things come out of an egg. So they literally have everything that is necessary for life. Now, again, in these cases, you want to use high quality stuff. You want to use the eggs that are coming from pasture raised, organic, out in the sun, happy chickens, quail, turkey, and so on. Okay. If you're going to spend extra money on higher quality foods, higher quality sourced foods in your dog's raw food diet, spend it on reproductive foods, because that's the least amount of increase in the cost with the biggest impact. Okay. And I also recommend that if you're worried about things like sensitivities, because it does matter with eggs too, try checking out the pet wellness allergy scans, because they'll tell you whether or not your dog has allergies to different kinds of proteins, different types of eggs from different types of animals. So it's worth making that investment. Now, again, quality sourcing means everything here. Spend your extra money on the high quality sourcing here. Pasture raised, organic, species appropriate diets, basically happy, healthy animals equals quality products. Okay. Now, what about puppies? Balancing from the start with puppies is basically taking everything and squishing it together. They're different than the adults. We can't, sometimes we have to, in extreme cases, make some modifications. But if you have a problem like that, then you can contact me and we can work through it together. But this is basically taking all these things that we've talked about and squishing them together from the start. Taking their bone content, organ content, meat content, the fish, the omega-3 sources, the reproductive foods, the milk, the eggs, all of it, and putting all of it together all at once, right? Now, in my opinion, reproductive foods for puppies are an absolute must, because they're going to make sure they're going to give you as many tools in your tool belt as possible to give your puppy, your growing puppy, a balanced diet. So if you have an adult dog and you don't want to feed raw eggs and you don't want to feed raw milk and those kinds of things, I disagree with you, and I think that you should, because your dog's diet will be so much better for it. But with puppies, reproductive foods are an absolute must, in my opinion. Now, in cases with puppies, it is better to go overboard than under. You don't want to get crazy and feed crazy amounts of stuff, but I'd rather you feed a little too much raw milk that has all that goodness in it than not enough. I'd rather see you give a little bit too much bone to start with than not enough. And again, you don't want to go crazy in either direction, but I would rather you go slightly over than under, meaning I would rather that your dog had a little bit too much meat in their diet than not enough meat in their diet and everything else, right? Because they're growing crazy little puppies and they need all these things to grow properly. And if they don't have them in abundance, then it starts to cause problems. Now, feeding frequencies are important here. With puppies, I don't recommend feeding any less than 3 meals per day. And this is something that basically everybody is in agreement with. Whether they are a traditional vet, whether they're a holistic vet, whether they're a dog trainer, whether they are a behaviorist, pretty much everybody in the dog world agrees that puppies should not be fed any less than 3 meals per day. They go through their calories way too fast. They are constantly growing and gaining sometimes as much as 5, 6, 10 pounds per week. They constantly need a source of calories. Okay, so do not feed your puppies any less than 3 meals per day until they are, in my opinion, at least a year old. at the very least a year old. Longer for big dogs, but we'll talk about that in a second. Now, here's where the percentages are different with puppies, okay? With adult dogs, you start at your 2%, you observe and adjust and move on. Puppies are different. With puppies, observe and adjust still counts, but start with these general guidelines and then again observe and adjust whether you need to. Whether the puppy isn't gaining enough weight or the puppy's gaining too much weight, then you want to adjust, but these are some general guidelines. At 8 weeks to 3 months, you want to start at 10% and end around 8%, okay? At 3 months, you want to start at 8% and end around 6% at 6 months. 6 months, you want to start at 6%, and by 9 months, you should be close to 4%. At 9 months, you again should be at 4%, and by the time you reach 1 year, you want to end around 2 to 3%, and then observe and adjust, just like we talked about before. Again, you need to observe and adjust here. And these things you can get these different adjustment rates using the Raw Feeding 101 calculator that you can find for free at rawfeeding101.com/free, because it'll give you percentages based on the dog's weight, everywhere from 1.5% all the way up to 10%, so that you can use that calculator for adult dogs and for puppies. Now, big breeds, giant breed dogs, right? We're talking like Great Danes here, Great Pyrenees, those things, right? I recommend doubling these time frames. Larger dogs take longer to mature, right? So a 18-year-old Great Dane is still going to be in their puppy stages, mentally, growth-wise, everything. So basically take these numbers and double them, right? So treat a year-old Great Dane as an example as a 6-month-old puppy feeding-wise in these numbers, okay? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to contact me at rawfeeding101.com/one-on-one, and we can set something up and I can explain it in detail. But basically double these time frames for larger dogs. Now, if you have a large but not giant breed dog like a German Shepherd, then you can extend this out to 18 months instead of 24 months, and just instead of feeding the dog until it's a puppy until it's 12 months old, feed it like it's a puppy until it's 12 months old. Again, the bigger the dog, the longer that it takes for them to finish maturing physically, mentally, everything. Now, if you're still, after all of these things are in the diet, you're still concerned about balance and mix and everything like that, consider doing a batch of Dr. Becker's vitamin mix. Okay, it's really simple to make, really easy to make. There's tons of instructions for it online, both in blog form and in video form. So if you're still worried about it, then I consider looking into Dr. Becker's vitamin mix. Now, the common supplements we have already addressed, really. We've already talked about digestive enzymes. We've talked about slippery elm bark. A really quick note here on fish oils of whether or not you should or should not feed them. I don't feed them anymore because my dogs don't do well on them. Your dogs may do well on them, but I have to say that if you're choosing to feed your dogs fish oils, you should really be following the instructions that I talked about earlier. Small containers that are dark in color with a glass container whenever possible. If you don't do these things, the chance of the oils going rancid and giving your dogs problems are just too high, okay? Now, common issues like diarrhea, vomiting, refusing raw food, we can't go into them in great detail here because we just don't have the time, but there are some basic things that you can do and know. For diarrhea and soft stools, a 24-hour fast is one of the best things that you can do. You want to avoid fasts whenever possible with puppies, but once they get to a year old, if they're having a day of diarrhea or something like that, then just give them a fast. And it's the same thing with vomiting. If you have a single one event of diarrhea or a single one event of vomiting, then I genuinely won't do anything, because sometimes things just happen. Just like human beings, sometimes we just get an upset stomach, sometimes things just happen. Now, if your dog has it twice, like let's say that today your dog has diarrhea twice, or today your dog throws up twice and doesn't do it anymore, then I would give them a 24-hour fast. It's one of the most commonly recommended things from vets and vet techs and everybody in the medical field there, as far as dogs go, is to give them a 24-hour fast. Don't feed them for the next 24 hours. Give their body a chance to work through whatever it is that they've got going on without having to spend extra energy on digestion. Now, if your dog has consistent bouts of either of these things, diarrhea or vomiting, like let's say today your dog throws up 4 times, or your dog has 4 bouts of diarrhea today, and they're just constantly having diarrhea, it's time to go to the vet. Because especially if you have a senior dog or a puppy, because dehydration is a serious, serious problem. And if you're having constant diarrhea and you're having constant vomiting, then your dog is losing more water, more hydration than they can take in. And again, it's dangerous for all dogs, but especially with puppies and senior dogs, it can kill your dog very quickly. So don't mess around with it. If your dog vomits over and over again, or your dog has diarrhea over and over again, go to the vet. Better safe than sorry. Now, one note here, even if it's just one, in my opinion, even if it's just one single isolated bout of either vomiting or diarrhea that has blood in it, you're going to the vet. I don't care if it's an emergency vet, I don't care if it's a local vet, whatever it is. If you have blood in your dog's diarrhea or the vomit, it's time to go to the vet, just period. It's end of story. Don't consider it. Your dog has blood in their vomit or their stool. It's time to go to the vet, okay? Now, refusing raw food. Refusing raw food has a ton of different factors. Could be that your dog isn't getting enough variety. It could be that your dog is getting bored. It could be that you're feeding your dog too much and you don't realize it, and so they're not hungry. There's tons of things that could lead to your dog refusing raw food, right? Maybe they're literally addicted to their kibble and they're having a hard time transitioning. In that case, I would recommend, again, a 24-hour fast to get them a little hungry. And with adult dogs, sometimes even a 2-day fast to make them have their raw food if they've become addicted to their kibble is necessary. And a 2-day fast for a healthy dog that doesn't have a problem like hyperglycemia or something like that is perfectly fine. It's not going to harm them. So a little bit of tough love there. I also have some videos on YouTube that you can check out on the Dog Dad channel on YouTube about dogs refusing raw food. But that's basically your main thing, is you either are, they're not getting enough variety, so you need to switch things up, add new things, tasty things to their food, like bone broth, eggs, kefir, all these things onto their food to entice them to eat. You're feeding them too much, and so they're not hungry, which is making them not eat. Or you're in the transition period and they're addicted, literally addicted to the carbs and sugar in their kibble, and they don't want that food. So it's time to give them a 2-day fast or a 1-day fast to entice them into eating, making them hungry. Okay. But I do recommend you go and check out the video about refusing raw foods over on the Dog Dad YouTube channel. Now, what now? What do you do now? You're transitioned, you are feeding awesome food, you're feeding omega-3 sources and everything else. What do you do now? It's time to increase your sourcing options, okay? You need to start posting more ads. You need to up your game. You need to start researching more online suppliers. You need to talk to local resources. You need to start hunting or making friends with hunters, finding co-ops, like going to keepthetailwagging.com, looking at that list. Excuse me. You need to increase your variety. Again, maybe your dog's refusing food. Maybe it's time to start adding in fermented vegetables and fermented seeds, or just seeds as a whole. Adding in more protein sources, more bone sources, more organ sources, more omega-3 sources. Maybe you're feeding smelt right now, but maybe it's time to start adding smelt, mackerel, salmon, all of it, right? And the most important part, not stopping your learning here. You have to keep learning. Just like I talked about at the beginning, there are some things that you just have to do. One of them being continuing your education. I'm 9 years in almost at this point, and I still learn stuff. I still have books on my bookshelf within arm's distance right now that I need to finish reading because it's taking my education to another level. We have to keep educating ourselves or we are doing our dogs a disservice. Okay, so promise me here and now that you will not stop learning. Don't do what I did. Don't get into a system of feeding and then not learn anything else. I did that for too many years in the very beginning of my journey, and it's not a good thing. You've got to keep learning. Don't stop at 80, 10, 5, 5. Make sure that you're adding in other things. Make sure that you're starting to add in things like reproductive foods. You're starting to consider feeding vegetables and seeds. You're getting in your omega-3 sources. You need to promise me that you're going to continue learning so that you can keep giving your dog the best diet possible, or else why are we here, right? We want to do everything that we can, and sometimes everything that we can do is everything that we can do, and that's just that. But you don't want to stop learning. You've got to stop learning, or not stop learning. Don't stop learning. You've got to keep learning. Okay, now what's missing? What couldn't we cover today? Right? Because we only had a 2-hour session. So what couldn't we cover today that you need to know, that you've got to know to make sure that you are doing this safely, to make sure that you're doing it properly, to make sure that you're doing the absolute best that you can for your dog? Some things that we weren't able to cover here is how to cope, hope to cope. Looks like I have a typo here, but how to cope when things go wrong. When you start having problems during your journey, with your dog is just struggling and it's weighing on you, like how do you cope with that? How do you keep going when the transition gets tough? Raw feeding myths. What myths are out there that you need to address to make sure that your nervousness can stop? How do we overcome the programming that we've been getting from kibble companies for the last several decades? How do you overcome those myths? The other raw feeding models and how to start them. This model was very heavily a prey model transition that you can easily make a barf model transition, but we weren't able to cover that here. And how do you transition into those things, right? So what are those other models and how do you start them? We couldn't cover that today. Considerations for small dogs and senior dogs, because they do have some special circumstances that need to be addressed. Super small dogs and senior dogs need to be fed slightly differently and have a different approach than medium to large breed average age dogs. Okay. Controlling the sodium in your dog's diet. Too much sodium in your dog's diet can wreak havoc on their health. And we couldn't cover that today. So it's necessary for you to know. You have to figure out sodium. If you feed too much sodium, it becomes a huge, huge problem, and it's really easy to do. What you need to know about feeding eggs, green tripe, pork, wild meats, fish, grinds, pre-mades, and more. There are some foods out there that you just need to know things about before you feed them. Especially if we're talking about things like pork, because of all the myths being spread around the community about feeding pork, feeding wild meats, whether you're a hunter, whether you're a fisher. What do you need to know about feeding grinds, or else your dog's going to run into problems? What do you need to know about pre-mades before you feed them, or your dog's going to run into problems? The different types of stool. We talked about having and addressing some issues with stool, but what are the different types of stool? What is it that you're going for? What does the poo tell you? Right? How do you actually look at what your dog's stool is doing and get some feedback on the adjustments that you need to make? Feeding supplements and whole foods like honey, turmeric paste. Oh my gosh, turmeric paste. I would be lost without it. Colostrum, glucosamine, and other joint supplements. And of course, bone broth. How to change your dog's feeding amounts based on activity. This is huge to make sure that you don't get a fat dog like I did. This is absolutely massive. You have to know how to change your dog's feeding amounts based on activity levels. Okay. And here it was a huge one for me. How to keep your knives and your cleavers sharp to make sure that you are meal prepping safely, to make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself, to make it easier, to make it faster. I mean, how do you do those things? This is Absolutely huge, guys. These things you have got to know to make sure that you are doing this right. And I've talked about it several times throughout the video here, but I do have the Raw Feeding 101 course that goes through all these things. Why should you bother enrolling? All of those topics that we just discussed, the raw feeding myths, what you need to know about feeding pork, what you need to know about feeding wild foods, what do you need to know about feeding turmeric paste and colostrum, all these different supplements. Is there too much supplementation? Is there such a thing as over supplementation, right? Another thing is that you can try the Raw Feeding 101 course for 7 days, risk-free. If you don't like it, then tell us. You get 100% of all of your money back. You can try it 100% risk-free and learn all of these things that you need to know to make sure that you're feeding your dog a proper, safe diet, right? The course comes with 70 plus, more being added all the time. There's actually about a huge update that's about to go through right now of 70 plus HD videos and downloadable resources that you can use. Everybody that signs up for the Raw Feeding 101 course gets a free 30-minute consultation. I sit down with you on the phone or on a video call for half an hour to talk about all of your raw feeding concerns that you have. You can do it before you start the course, you can do it halfway through the course, you can do it after the course. Whenever you want to sit down to chat with me for a half an hour or an hour if you choose, there's options for that. Then we can do that. Whenever you want to sit down and talk to me about your specific dog and your dog's specific issues and your specific concerns, you get to do that when you sign up for the course. You also get a free month of Dog Dad's Pack. Dog Dad's Pack is my monthly membership program where every other week we get together as a pack, meet on video, and talk as a group, really privately. We address concerns. We help group members and pack members that are going through the transition. We talk about everything dog. We've talked about food. We've talked about supplements. We've talked about training. I mean, everything. Dogs living with animals, other animals like chickens and cats and everything else, right? And you get a free month of that when you sign up for the course. Access to Dog Dad's Pack members only Facebook group and access to the Raw Feeding 101 course students only Facebook group. Regular, like the Raw Feeding 101 Facebook group people don't get to be in these groups because they're not pack members and they're not course students. There's no view limits, meaning that you can watch these videos, these 70 plus HD videos, as many times as you want. There's no, you have access to this for 30 days. And then these videos go away forever, so you better learn everything now. I have students like Jamie that I talked about earlier in the course that's now, making 118 meals at a time, whose dog was literally at death's door, who still comes back now. Like I think she's been through the course, a year and a half ago, who still comes back and watches videos over again. So there's no view limits. You can watch the videos as many times as you want to. You get access to all the future updates and additions at no cost. When I add more videos and when I update current videos, you don't get charged for them. You just get the newest, most up-to-date information when it becomes available. As soon as it's there, you have access to it. You don't need to sign up for anything additional. You don't need to pay anything extra. It's just there for you to watch whenever you have time. And no matter what it is that your current situation is right now, financially, you can afford it because there's lifetime options, there's payment plan options, there's monthly access options. Literally everybody has access to this regardless of their current income levels, okay? So do your dog the service, do yourself the service. Make sure that you are not going into this uneducated. Make sure that you have that bedrock education. Make sure that you're giving your dog the absolute best that you possibly can. Take advantage of the lifetime, the payment plans, the monthly access options. Maybe you only need it for 30 days. You're good. You've learned everything that you need to know, and you move on after that point, and you only had it for 1 month. That's perfect too, because you got the education that you needed to give your dog a good diet. So go to rawfeeding101.com and click course at the top, and you can start your 7-day risk-free trial. Again, you don't like it? Contact us within 7 days and we'll give you everything back. 0 questions asked. You just didn't like it. It wasn't for you. It didn't give you the information that you needed, and you're good to go. Okay. So go to rawfeeding101.com and click course at the top and get your 7-day risk-free trial started today. Now, if you are just terrified, you're just terrified of doing this by yourself and you just don't think that you can do it on your own, even after this workshop, even if you go through the course, if you are just terrified of doing it by yourself, then I do have the 6-week transition program. Okay. This is where literally, just like we see these guys doing here, we literally do everything together for 6 weeks straight. I help you with your getting through the course to get your base level education. We get you prepared, finding all your different food sources that are around you to make sure that you have all the foods available on hand. We go through week 1 together. We go through week 2 together, 3, 4, and everything that you need to do afterwards to continue making sure that you feed your dog a good diet. And you can find that over on gumroad.com/L/6week. And that's a lowercase L, not an I. And make sure that you use the discount code 50 that only you guys get access to. Okay. Only the people that watch through this have access to this code. Okay. So don't share it with anybody else because you put in the time to see it. So that is it, my friends. This is the Raw Feeding 101 workshop. I want you guys to get your education. Watch through this workshop again. Watch through this workshop again. Watch through this workshop again. Get your bedrock of education done. Go through the course. Take advantage of the 7-day risk-free trial. Get your free consultation, your free month of Dog Dads pack, get into these Facebook groups, watch the videos as many times as you want to, do whatever you need to make it fit into your budget as far as lifetime payment plans, monthly access, do whatever it is that you need to do to get your bedrock education done. Okay, because we want to make sure that you are doing the best that you can for your dog, and you can't do that without a solid education. And if you just desperately want the help and you don't think you can do it by yourself, then sign up with the 6-week transition program and we will do it together. Okay. Well, this has been the Raw Feeding 101 workshop, everybody. Thank you for your time. Check out rawfeeding101.com if you have any additional questions. Watch through the YouTube videos over on YouTube on the Dog Dad channel. And I will see you guys next time.